See you. I once was able to look at the clock and decide when the meeting started. No, it isn't time yet.
It is now.
It is now. Ladies and gentlemen, it's 7 p.m. Please rise for the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll call to order this meeting of the Town Council. By way of announcements, I'd like to say that Maple Avenue has been paved, and as a result of some ingenuity on the part of several people, so has an area in front of the exit from the fire barn, such that the repairs to that asphalt area was able to be accomplished using the same mobilization that we had for Maple Avenue. So it spared us mobilizing another group to come down and do that. So I'm grateful to the administrator, who's not with us, but for his efforts in making both of those events happen, and I hope the citizens of Maple Avenue are pleased. We'll wait for your judgment on that, sir.
Yes, we have.
Okay, thank you. Any other announcements that need to be made? All right, we're beginning this evening's meeting with two presentations. The first from the Conservation Commission, a study that they have conducted over the past couple of years entitled, "Do We Have Enough Water in Little Compton?" And Don McNaughton will be making that presentation for us.
Thank you very much. I am now in my 6th year as chair of the Conservation Commission. Time flies when you're having fun. The first couple of years, we worked with URI researchers to design the study that we are now in the midst of. We've carried out 3 years of study so far, and we'll be doing a 4th year this summer. So, and I'm here to report on the results that we've seen in the 3rd year, but also then I'll summarize the results that we saw through the first 3 years of the study. And perhaps each of you had a chance to read the report that I sent along. Today's presentation will be very much a recapitulation of that. And please stop me and ask any questions whenever you have them. So in the summer of 2021, we carried out the 3rd year of the study, and we sampled 159 wells across town, fairly well geographically dispersed. That was just a few more than we had sampled in 2020. Now, just to remind you, Little Compton sits almost entirely atop fractured bedrock, which is a geological condition that makes determining the quantity of water that sits beneath us very, very difficult. All our water sits in the cracks and fissures of the bedrock, and unlike sand or gravel, there are no mathematical equations that you can determine how much water we have. So it's a little bit of a crapshoot to understand the amount of water in town. And so we are using the process of sampling water quality every year to see if there are changes in that water quality, which may lead us to believe that we are up against some boundary of water quantity. Now, just to be clear, we've not seen any indication that that's happening. So I think we have water in town. Now, what we do is we take samples from wells and we measure the electrical conductivity, which is a simple and inexpensive way to estimate the amount of total dissolved solids in the water samples. If one were to have high levels of total dissolved solids, it's an indication that you're probably having either salt, septic system residue, or fertilizers in your water. Now, mostly, if we see high levels in town, it's because of salt, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But by monitoring the changes in total dissolved solids over a number of years, we can begin to start to see if there are changes in that measurement and how that change in measurement may reflect lower or higher rates of precipitation. All the water that we have in town comes from precipitation. We don't have a big aquifer beneath us that's carrying water from somewhere else to feed our wells. All our water in town is from rain and snow that seeps down into the bedrock, and then our wells pull it back up. So let me try to summarize what we've seen over the 3 years of our study. Are there any questions so far? Larry, could you pull, my able-bodied assistant Larry is helping me by, or should I call you Carol Merrill? I'm not really sure which one, but this is a chart of 3 years of precipitation. Now, I know the colors are a little difficult to read for those of us in the room, so I will try to tell you what we got here. The red line, that is the solid line that goes through the middle of the chart, that is the line of annual average precipitation. Across the bottom are months, October, November, December, January, all the way through September. And up the side are number of inches of precipitation per year. Now you may ask, why do you start in October rather than starting in January? Because we sample wells in July and September, we want to understand the amount of precipitation we have for the year prior to the sampling. So we start in October and we end in September, which gives us the 12 months prior to our sampling. So as I was saying, the red line, the solid line in the middle is the 30-year average annual precipitation. And if you can go up to the right-hand side, you'll see that on average, we get about 49 inches of rain per year in Little Compton. I should say rain and snow. We get 49 inches of precipitation. The upper line, which is dotted yellow, which you could hardly tell, that was 2019. We had a relatively wet year in 2019. Billy, remember that year? Okay. And we had about 60 inches of precipitation versus the average of 50. The green dotted line, which sort of runs parallel to the red line for a while and then sort of leads off below it, was 2020. And that was a relatively dry year. So we have, going from the top, 2019, which is wet, the 30-year average, which is about 50 inches of rain. The lowest number, the lowest line as you get to the right-hand side of the chart is the green line. That was about 40 inches of precipitation in 2020. And then 2021 ends up basically right where the average is. So over the course of our 3 years, and in fact, I'm just going to go really quick on this. So 2019, 2020, 2021, and this is the average. So 2021 was at the average, 2020 was below, and 2019 was above. So this range of precipitation was fantastic for conducting a study because we actually got to see the impact on total dissolved solids of varying levels of precipitation. If everything pretty much hit the 30-year average, it would have been too bad because we wouldn't have seen any variability. We wouldn't have been able probably to measure any difference. So with that, Larry, could you advance the slide? On the right-hand side of this chart is that annual precipitation that I was talking about. 2019, we had about 60 inches, 2020 about 40, and 2021 about 50. Again, 2021 was pretty much on average. But the middle column shows what the total dissolved solids did during this time. And when we get more rainfall, more precipitation, the total dissolved solids measured in parts per million are low for two good reasons. In fact, I'll jump to those reasons in a second. But when rainfall is low, the total dissolved solids reading goes up, and you can see that when rainfall was on average about where our 30-year precipitation line is, it's in the middle. The first thing about this is it validated the design of our study. We assumed that with more precipitation, we'd have lower total dissolved solids, and we did. And we assumed with less precipitation, that number would go up, and it did. So that was good. Now, why does the number go up or go down depending upon the amount of precipitation? For two very good reasons, which I have come to learn over time of doing the study. The first is that imagine a bowl of fresh water sitting atop Little Compton. In essence, our fresh water sits atop the salt water that is beneath us. So that fresh water actually holds at bay the salt water from entering the same crevices and cracks and fissures that feed our wells. So the less fresh water you have, the more the salt water is going to intrude into the cracks and fissures of the bedrock, and hence have an opportunity to get into our wells. And so as we have more precipitation, the bowl of water that sits atop the land gets bigger and bigger and bigger. The pressure builds and it holds the salt water at bay. And that's one reason why when you have more precipitation, you have lower levels of total dissolved solids, because salt is the main character in total dissolved solids here in town. The other reason is that when you have more precipitation, there is more rainfall to dilute the impact of fertilizers, septic system leach fields, and other actors like that. So you have the leach fields and the fertilizers are diluted more, therefore the total dissolved solids are going to go down just because you have more precipitation. And so those twin impacts, holding at bay salt water and diluting better the fertilizers and septic system leach fields, cause the total dissolved solids to go down during plentiful rainfall and up during a more dry year. Any questions? Well, either you're not listening or I'm doing pretty well. I can't tell which it is. Okay, so
Just one quick question,
Yeah.
Don. When you show total rainfalls and snowfall, are you considering an inch of rain, an inch of snow as the same?
no.
No?
So going back to my high school days, I think an inch of rainfall is equivalent to about 10 inches of snowfall. So, correct? So that would work into that calculation.
And
So,
also the saturation rate changes from rain on the ground versus snow on the ground.
totally, because, and in fact, I'm going to touch upon that, Paul. That's a great point. I'm going to touch upon that in a second towards the end, if I could. Okay. Larry, could you advance the slide? So, let me try to show you in a picture form what happened across town. The chart on the left is 2019, the chart in the center is 2020, and I'm guessing you can figure out the chart on the right is 2021. So the first thing to notice is the dark green color that you see in the northwest corner of town. Those are the lowest readings for total dissolved solids. The dark green color is under 100 parts per million. The medium green is 100 to 200 parts per million. The light green is 200 to 300. And then you have an orange and a red and a yellow, which are 300 or more. And I'm going to point out something in a little bit that doesn't really show up well in this chart. But what you'll see is on the left-hand chart and the right-hand chart, a lot more dark green and medium green than in the center. And that's because we had more rain in 2019 and 2021 and less rain in 2020. And so the total dissolved solids pretty much all across town increased during 2020, the middle chart, showing higher readings. Again, the light green has higher levels of TDS, total dissolved solids, than the dark green or the medium green. The other thing that happened, you can't really see it well, so I'm going to jump up here and point it out. There's a band of yellow here. So here, from Secana Point, sort of up along West Main Road, just above Church Cove, that is all yellow, which is indicating 300 to 400 parts per million total dissolved solids. That's important because we would have expected that to happen based on the information we received from our URI researchers. What's going on there is in the year that we had less water, there was less fresh water to hold back the salt water from incursion into fissures and cracks, and hence more salt water was appearing in wells along the coast. And so that finding, or I should say, that finding is pretty critical in that it reinforces our understanding of what's going on in town. In periods of low precipitation, we are going to likely see higher levels of salt in wells near the coast. And we're seeing that clearly from Secana Point up through Church Cove. And I think that's about what I wanted to say on that chart. Any questions with that? So, conclusions based on 3 years of data. The first thing I want to say is that this is a scientific research. It's very difficult to draw any conclusions after only 3 years. However, there are indications that sort of reinforce what we think would happen, and in fact, we're seeing that. So the first is just how critical precipitation is to the amount of water that we have in town. Okay, that seems like a very obvious statement. But the fact is that the amount of, the total dissolved solids measurement changed almost immediately with the impacts of lesser or more precipitation. There was very little lag time. We were measuring wells in July, we measured them again in September, and we saw clear indications that based on precipitation, the September readings were either higher or lower than the July readings. So there's very little lag time. What that says to us is that imagine if you had a bathtub full of water, a big bathtub full of water, and you put in a little bit more water with some dye in it. It would take, depending upon the size of your bathtub, a lot of dye to change the color of all the water in the bathtub. And I think that's what we're seeing here is that if we had a big aquifer, it would take a lot of precipitation to change the total dissolved solids measurement in that big aquifer of water. We don't have one. And so the amount of precipitation very quickly results in differing levels of total dissolved solids in the cracks and fissures of our bedrock, which means we surmise that if we were ever confronted with a significant period of drought, we are going to get salt water incursion in wells along the coast. Now, we are blessed with plenty of rain in Little Compton. Yes, and there are years when it's more or less. But if we were to see a period of sustained drought, which I'm only guessing has indeed happened through history, and I'm not sure about that, we might begin to see more salt water in our wells. So I think that's, let me also say this. At the same time, with climate change, we are seeing more rainfall in Little Compton than prior years. That is the trajectory that the scientific community believes we're on in Little Compton. The northeast of the United States is going to see more rainfall than less rainfall in the coming decades. Other parts of the country aren't so lucky in that regard. However, those rainfall episodes will happen in more significant rainfall more often, meaning that it won't be gentle rains that have time to seep into our fissures and cracks. More rain will come heavier and will result in more runoff because the land cannot accept the rain as quickly as it's coming down. And so even though we're getting more precipitation, there's a very good chance that it will end up just running off the land rather than resulting in more water in our fissures and cracks. That's just an hypothesis. We haven't seen anything like that yet, but that's what the climate scientists are saying about heavier rains over shorter periods of time. In addition, however, our summers are getting hotter and longer, and as you all know, population swells in town during the summers. So at that time of year, when the population swells, unfortunately it gets hotter, water use goes up, and in fact, water use goes up in periods of drought also, which is sort of counterintuitive. Water use goes up in periods of drought because of increased irrigation, pools filling, and evapotranspiration in plants. So even though we're getting more water, it'll happen in episodes where there'll be more runoff, and there are, unfortunately, in the summertime when we need the water, it's hotter, it's more crowded, and so this all sort of builds to a point where we aren't seeing any indication that there are problems here in Little Compton with the amount of water we have. But that's the point of doing the study in the first place. And we're going to keep at it, and we'll keep seeing indications of what's going on. The last thing I want to just say is that when we talk about these parts per million, the EPA guideline for drinking water is 500 parts per million. So everywhere in town, we are well below 500 parts per million. Now, out of the 159 wells that we sampled in town, about 10 wells did exceed that 500 parts per million. And so we are contacting, we always contact people after the study is done to let them know about their wells. Most of that can easily be solved with either filtration or some sort of treatment on your well. So it's not like people are hurting themselves, but we want to make sure that people understand what's going on. So with that, that's sort of a summary of the well water study for year 3. Any questions?
Thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Ron, now, what's the effect of density, housing density?
We were very fortunate in town that someone had that many people had the foresight in 1968 to pass 2-acre zoning. I'm sure 2-acre zoning may have its proponents or opponents at this point, but from a water perspective, 2-acre zoning is critical to Little Compton maintaining its ability to support life. As you get, and so one of the reasons why I was talking about Sakana Point in 2020 is because that's one of the more densely populated areas. And so not only do you have more wells, but you also have septic systems in close relation to wells. And so as water during drought time may cause saltwater intrusion, at the same time you've got septic systems relatively close to drinking wells and leach fields relatively close to drinking to wells. And all of that will cause, if we have problems, those will be the areas that we see it first. Jamestown, for instance, there is an area in Jamestown very densely populated. They ran into real trouble with their drinking water a decade ago, to the point where they had to implement some regulations that they had not had previously to do that. So things change, things do happen, and the point of doing the study is to make sure we get out in front of this. And at this point, you know, I'd say that we are cautiously optimistic, but at the same time, we haven't really had any periods of significant drought in town. And that would be a problem if we did. Andrew.
So the wells that you sample in July and September,
Yes.
are you going to the same wells in both July and then again in September?
Yes, same wells.
Okay. And so this is just an average, each one is the average of the 2 samples of each house?
That's correct, it's an average, you're right.
Okay, so, because I think, you know, to Rob's point, you know, we often link drinking water to density of housing, and, you know, goes back to the 60s, as you said, when they were developing the 2-acre zoning. I mean, that was one of the biggest arguments for implementing it at the time. So I'm just curious to see, I'd be curious to see month over month, if you have the resources to do monthly testing, which I know is difficult to come by, but to see what the water quality is like during those summer months when there's a greater draw on the groundwater,
Right.
and seeing how much it does impact overall. Because this is a great, you know, this is an amazing average of each year, and a snapshot of that.
Sure. I mean, you know, we are conducting the study on basically $5,000 a year.
Yeah.
That's through the good graces of our researchers at URI who do this for free. But the town council for this coming year did at least in the budget, is proposed an additional $1,000 for the Conservation Commission to buy something called a continuous logger, which gives us readings every hour throughout the year. And we installed our first continuous logger on Warren's Point a year ago, and we want to install our second one somewhere else in town, which we're still working on. I'm cognizant of the time. Any questions? Yes?
Many wells in New Compton have a lot of iron in the water.
Mine included, yes.
My well was tested, it's the one that's on the list.
Yep.
I think I heard you say that total dissolved solids is measured by conductivity of the sample.
The easiest way to estimate total dissolved solids is by measuring the electrical conductivity of the water.
Doesn't iron really raise conductivity?
Yes.
And you take that into account?
Yes.
Just
Yes,
one
Paul.
note on the building density, you didn't touch on was the roof runoffs. Every square foot of ground that isn't subject to the rain touching it is less saturation you get into the earth.
So that's an excellent point. One of the blessings in Little Compton is that the measurement of total impervious surface, which is a percentage of total land mass, is still, I believe, under 7%. I think it may even still be right around 5%. With that low of total impervious surfaces, we are in better stead than if there were significant amount of building which would raise that number, and then you'd have more runoff, less getting into the ground, so forth and so on. So that's another benefit we have at this point.
On that note, DEM requires people to put rain gardens in, so water coming off roofs, that's going to rain garden, so it dissipates over the ground, instead of just coming and dropping down.
Thank you. That's very, very useful to us, and I think it puts some facts on the table with respect to our water supply. I'm glad to hear there is established correlation between TDS and inventory of water. It
So far,
should
so
be a
good.
good measure. Thanks, Don.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to ask the North Garden design team, who's here to talk to us about what's happening at the Congregational Church, to give us their presentation. And if you don't use total dissolved solids in your discussion, it's not important to us.
It's a hard act to follow, for sure. And I'm Carol Beach, and Peter Derbyshire and I are going to just provide some insights and updates about the project we're referring to as the North Garden. As many of you may have seen, if you've come through the center of town and you've seen a lot of beautiful stone that has been piled up on the north side of the United Congregational Church, that is part of the project to come. And tonight, what we simply wanted to be able to do is not do a presentation, but be able to give you these insights about what's happening as a good neighbor, and so that we can be transparent, and also any place where we can have areas of partnership, we welcome it as well. I will say that the North Garden group is a small committee that is part of the, under the umbrella of the Board of Trustees from the United Congregational Church. And what we've been tasked to do, our small 5-person committee, is really simple. We are looking to complete the renovation of the church, which is the replacement of the temporary ramp that you see on the north side of the church with a permanent stone ramp, as well as accessible walkways along the North Garden and along the east side of the church. And we're also looking to really develop on the north side of the church as well a garden and a really meditative and contemplative space that the church can use, but that the entire community can use as well. So we're looking to, this is really a private-public project, and it was always part of the original vision for the church renovation that was recently completed. There was always this sense that we were going to be developing this north side, this church-owned lot, but that also is very historic, has ties to the former town hall, has ties to the historic cemetery, and we're very excited about bringing the entire renovation project to a beautiful close by developing the North Garden. At this point, I will also say that we have, in terms of working with the community, we've also already started working with the tree committee in town, and to replace some of the trees that needed to be taken down due to safety concerns. And we have been working on fundraising for the last 6 months, let's say, and we're on target, and we can see the finish line, being able to raise all the funds for the project. So we're feeling very hopeful, very excited about the community support that we're getting, as well as from the congregation. But today we thought we would just, and I'll turn it over to the expert now to really just talk about a high-level overview of what the plans are, and so if there are any questions, we can answer them for you. Thank you. Peter.
Well, as you can see by the plans in front of you, basically, we do need a handicap ramp coming down. We have an elevation that we have to overcome of about 37 inches from the portico of the church to the street level. So we have to distribute that over a large area to get a handicap pitch of 1 inch rise per foot of run. The project does require stairs coming up from the street to a landing at a patio, we call it, which would be about 14 inches lower than the church portico, and then the access would run to the south, dropping down to street level, approximately, I think it's about 30 feet or so on that drawing from the patio. There is another sidewalk, I'm going to call it, because its pitch is not, it's less than 1 inch rise. So it's not considered a handicapped ramp, but there'll be a sidewalk that extends to the north also, but would have an ADA ramp coming up from the street level. So wheelchairs could access the sidewalks at 2 locations, and then stairs coming up in the center. It's a bit of a challenge because, you know, your inclination is to want to come to the front of the church, or into the center of the gable end of the church, but we're not. Most everybody's coming in from the side.
So there really are 2 accesses for a wheelchair, and they converge at the rest of the ramp to get you up to level.
Correct. All of the stairs will be done in granite, set in concrete. The bluestone, very, very heavy bluestone, it's 4 inches thick, will be dry laid with the sand in between the joints. It's on an approved road bed from the Rhode Island Department of Transportation. We are currently awaiting their comments on our project. We should be getting that back within the next week or so and address any of their issues. We do have an engineer on board that did all the filings for that. And we're working our way through with the fire safety people to make sure that all of this is to their liking. Probably what we would like to ask from the town is if we could get one more of your beautiful light poles, if that would be available. We'd like to place one at the stairs coming up at the center. That would aid us greatly if that was possible. We would also like to place conduits between the lights wherever we're gonna be doing the diggings, because right now I know they're direct burial wires. I found them when we put
It's a
in the
mess.
temporary
Right.
ramp. So, all of that would be under the guise of our electrician, Steve Madden, when that happens. I don't think we're gonna be needing terribly much area, blocked off in the parking for this work. I haven't quite worked that out with the contractor, Scott Shaw, as to his needs, but, we'll try to do minimal disruption of activities in the town.
Did you say, Peter, you had an engineer working with the state on,
Well, we hired a civil engineer to do all of our grade work and to prepare all of the curb cut requirements with, for submission to the Rhode
I
Island
just hate to
Department
see
of
the state throw a
Transportation.
monkey wrench into something because they said, no, you can't do that, because you've got to set your handicap parking up and all that other stuff, right?
We have not determined exactly where that handicap parking is going to go. There are some slots that have been allocated. I'm certain there's gonna be discussion as to how many that we need and where those would be located. I'm assuming that that's going to be a question that comes back from the Rhode Island Department of Transportation. If not, it certainly needs to be discussed. I don't know how one determines the volume of the number of spaces required. But we have the needs of the church, but we also have the needs of the community to consider there because of it is our parking lot in the town.
There's another interface that I anticipate, and that is after a very, very long wait, we think that the stimulus funds that are coming to the state as a result of the COVID bills that have passed the Congress, we expect that the state intends to accelerate dramatically the repair of Meeting House, which for the state's purpose extends all the way up past the front of the church to South of Commons. That's all called Meeting House in their vernacular. And then also South of Commons, which is not only what we think of as South of Commons, but also the facing street that is the east side of the Commons. Both of those repairs we anticipate to happen in the near future. I have, for 18 years, heard that story and it has not come to materialize, but it seems much more likely now. What I'd like you to realize is we are committed to working with the church with respect to our review of the plans for that, such that we accommodate whatever it is that you have all, by this time, already done, so as to ensure there's some synchronization between that. But that would certainly be our intention.
Yeah, we have a little bit of buffer so we can change elevations.
Yeah.
You know, I would assume that there must be some magic trick that they pulling out asphalt and regrading.
Right.
When they do that, we'll be amenable to help in any way we can.
Good.
It's just where, we certainly know where it abuts the road, there's always gonna be some ambiguity. Our only goal is to try to not collect water there, so it doesn't freeze during the winter. And we'd just like, hopefully, to get a light from you if we could, and then put the wires and conduits wherever we have hardscapes, so that if something does go south on us, we can pull a new wire through without tearing things apart.
Okay, thank you for bringing that to our attention. And we look forward, I'm grateful, we are grateful for the fact that you've brought this to us at this point so that we can hopefully synchronize these two efforts, even if they're separated by some period of time, so that they get to the same final objective.
Yeah, we're all ears, we're somewhat fleet-footed, we can change things as necessary.
Okay, except for those 4-inch blue
Well,
stones,
they
they're probably
don't
not
move
moving.
those more than we have, that's for sure.
Fair enough.
I just had a couple of questions. On the tents there, those are only gonna be put there for like the church fair or special functions. They're not gonna be there all the time.
The benches,
No, the tents,
Oh.
tents.
the tents?
Yeah, you got a couple of tents
Oh, yeah,
Drawing.
yeah, those are only for
for
special
temporary,
functions, yeah.
right? And this is gonna be open to all,
Yes.
okay? I mean, what's the process to be able to donate a light to this? Just by motion? I think it's a good project.
Yeah,
I think it's kind of
I think
beautiful.
it's not on our agenda to do
Right.
so, but I believe I will talk to the administrator. We are already talking about how we're gonna do the lighting system. We now have an input that says, it would be helpful to have the lights evenly spaced. So we'll take that up and bring it back at our next meeting, if that meets with your,
Yeah, that's
agreement.
good. I mean, I think we should do
As well.
everything we can to help with this project, because I think it's really gonna beautify the commons.
yeah, I think the same.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for
Thank you.
bringing that. Any questions on either effort? All right, the next item of business is approval of 3 sets of minutes, first of our last meeting on April 7th.
Motion to approve the minutes of April 7th, April 14th, and April 18th, unless anybody has any questions or comments on them.
Second. Motion's made and seconded. Is there further discussion on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All 5 are in favor. Next are the department head reports of the police and fire departments.
Motion to place the police department and the fire department, department head reports for the month of March on file, unless anybody has any questions or comments as written.
I'll second it.
Motion made and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. The next item is an item of old business where, sitting as the Board of License Commissioners, the council will discuss options available to them with regard to an application for a Class BV retail beverage license received from Dionysus Acquisitions doing business as Carol and Secana Vineyard for premises on 168 West Main Road, and more specifically out of a building with an address of 53 Winery Road as the newly numbered E911 system has designated it. We have 2 documents in support of that. One, a letter from the zoning official to the town council with his opinion regarding the application, and the other, a letter from Larry Anderson, who is present with us regarding the application before the council and related zoning and amendments as discussed in past years. May I say that I'll ask Mr. Anderson to give us his input. I will say that the zoning official has opined that the owners of the property are applying for a BV retail beverage license, which may coincide with a restaurant setting as per the proposed menu. Per use table, which he cites, a restaurant is not permitted in the residential zone. So that this will significantly inform our decision, but I'll ask Mr. Anderson to comment on his. Thank you. Thank you. The solicitor recuses from this discussion.
Thank you, council members. I was prompted to write the council based on the letter that I had seen from the zoning official, and particularly that provision that you cited, in which he says, it's a terse letter, but he's pretty clear in the final paragraph. The owners of the property are applying for a BC retail beverage license, which may coincide with the restaurant setting as per the proposed menu. Per use table 1A, use C13, a restaurant is not permitted in a residential zone, period. So I'm not going to go through my whole letter. I'm just going to make 2 points. I think that in light of that letter, I think that that the zoning official identifies a zoning issue, which I believe needs to be addressed and resolved, perhaps, before you can take up the beverage license. And I'll leave it at that. You will have to, if you would agree with me, in consultation with your attorney, then it would be appropriate for your attorney to advise you how to proceed, or how to advise the applicant to proceed. So that's my first point. I think that it's premature to address the beverage license until the identified zoning issue is resolved. That's the immediate thing. The other general thing, and it's got a long story, but I do think this application illustrates the situation I believe the town is still in with regard to acting on what we've described in the past, accessory uses related to agriculture. And you will recall, while I was on the council, the planning board and the council took a stab at that, and for a variety of reasons, it's sort of been on the shelf, partly because there was ongoing litigation and other events. So, but I do think, without going into all the details, that this is a reminder that perhaps the council and planning board should consider revisiting that process take a fresh start, perhaps, because as it is, with the somewhat skeletal definition we have in our current zoning ordinance with regard to agricultural uses, a definition that's almost 30 years old, and in light of the experiences we've had and developments with regard to the amendments to the Right to the Farm Act over that period of time, and court cases with regard to the Right to Farm Act in terms of what the town may or may not regulate, we're putting a heavy load on the zoning officials to interpret our current zoning ordinance on issues like this. So all I'll conclude is I'm not here opposing a restaurant as a use at the vineyard, or a restaurant or other uses at other agricultural properties, and I think there's a good case to be made for them, but I think we're in a tough spot to figure out how to deal with those kinds of things based on the zoning ordinance we have. So those are the 2 points I want to make.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Discussion on this.
The vineyard already serves alcohol and serves food, but what they're proposing pushes it kind of into a gray area, and I don't feel comfortable approving it at this point from what I see. Just arbitrarily saying, yeah, here you go, but I think it's plausible. I don't personally have anything against it, but I don't know if we can actually approve the license, because it looks like it's going to conflict with our own zoning officials' opinion.
You know, I feel the same way as Paul. Personally, I don't think it's going to be an expansion. I did talk to Cynthia Rocha. She did say at the last meeting that the kitchen itself was going to stay the same size, and obviously they've been serving food out of that. The area that's going to be used for the seating is the wine tasting room, so that's not going to increase. But obviously, I'm not a zoning official, so I think we have to go by what the zoning official says at this time, which gives them another avenue. They can go to the zoning board if they so desire to.
I think they've got a good case, but it's nothing we can approve without them going before zoning and have zoning go through it and look at it.
To approve this, we'd be acting like the zoning board, which I don't think we should be doing.
Might I suggest a motion that would defer our judgment or our vote on this approval pending resolution of the conflict with our zoning ordinance? And by that, we would not prescribe what that process might be. Could be an appeal, could be a request for a variance. That would be not specified. I would suggest that the motion simply be to defer.
Would you make that motion?
Yes, I'm going to say it again so that we can write it down. That I would move that we defer acting on this application until there is resolution to the conflict with our current zoning ordinance, which specifies no restaurants are allowed in the residential zone.
I'll second that motion.
Discussion.
Yeah, I support the overall idea. I think it's a little unfair to any applicant to say it that way, only because it seems like there's no resolution for them at this point.
The motion implies the lack of a resolution.
Yeah, there's no action, I guess, going forward for us.
How might we reword that?
I was going to make it much simpler. I said I think they have to go to the zoning board for relief, and then that gives them the avenue to go to. But I
I-
think that's what you said, but
I think that's the way Bob's worded it. He's not denying it. We're not denying that, but we need input from the zoning board.
but I understand
on-
Andrew's
on
point.
zoning
It
issues.
sounds like it's dead-ended there, but it's really not.
Like, if we're gonna say no, let's just say no, is my point.
I don't believe we have the information to be able to say
Okay.
no, in the sense that the applicant clearly submitted this in good faith, saying, I'm gonna take what I'm doing now and make it different. We interpret that as bigger. They use the word restaurant. They haven't used that word before, so we're sort of in tension here. We're saying, is this food accompanying the serving of wine? No, it's more than that. So rather than make a decision and describe what we think they are asking for, why not defer judgment until they have the opportunity to decide how they're gonna proceed, including coming back to us and saying, we'd like you to reconsider, or whatever avenue they might wish to take. But the difference would be that we're not prescribing for them that you must go to the zoning board. We're not saying that. I believe that would be an avenue to resolution, but I don't think I don't see an advantage in telling them what they have to do to satisfy us when we're not ready yet. All we have before us is the zoning official properly saying restaurant N. And so we're in a situation where we can't approve something that is in conflict with our zoning ordinance. Yeah.
I think it's pretty self-evident, the discussion we're having to Secana Vineyard, that, you know, their options, when we decline this or defer this, whatever word you want to use, that they would either have to go to zoning, or they'd have to appeal what we're doing today.
Right.
So I think it's pretty self-evident.
Are you ready to vote?
I am.
All in favor of the motion as made, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you. Next, by way of new business, a request from the Beach Commission to approve the submission of a grant pre-application to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for a study to develop a strategy and plan to preserve Little Compton town beaches. You have in front of you the NFWF grant application. It's been pre-prepared. The only comment that I would have with respect to it is it speaks to a commitment, a pledge of funds from the 2021 and 2022 budgets. I would point out that the fiscal 2021 budget and that cycle is closed without any encumbrance of funds from there. So I would suggest that in our discussion, we consider it as the 2022 budgets and the 2023 budget, which we are about to put before the people for the purpose of approval for fiscal 23. It's a distinction simply of the fact that we can't rely on funds that have already been rolled back into the general fund.
There's enough extra funding in the Beach Commission's budget to allow for this.
Yeah. Is there more to the, Mr. Mara and Mr. Ryan, is there more to the discussion, or do you simply seek a council endorsement to go forward, approval?
Motion to allow the Beach Commission and Rob Mara to go forward on this proposed project. And I don't know if, we don't need to authorize them or allow them to spend the $10,000. They can.
No, I'd simply want them to amend the description to be fiscal 22 and 23 rather than 21 and 22.
With the description from fiscal year 2022 and fiscal year 2023 as amended.
Second. Discussion on that?
Yeah, has any study been done to see if there's any infringement on the control of the beach by accepting this grant? Like, because I use the boat ramp at Scotty Point. Once that was taken, federal fund was taken, then anybody in this. This is just a study. This is just a study. Just a study. Okay.
But it says source type, it says source type, non-federal. I mean, I know it says National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, but.
Is there any overlap here with the municipal resiliency grant with this?
Given that this is a study, I suppose it could have if it were expeditiously accomplished, it could change something we're doing, but I think that'll be accomplished within the next calendar year, right?
That actually strengthens our position in applying, because we already had planned some work, and it was due to land, the work that was planned.
And so it strengthens your position with National Fish and Wildlife? Does that answer your question, Councilor?
Yeah.
Go ahead, motion on the table.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thanks for your work on that. The next item of business is a proposal to proclaim April as Fair Housing Month.
Motion to approve as written.
Motion made and seconded to approve. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The next is to confirm appointment of Donald T. Gomez as the representative of the CRMC for Little Compton.
I'll move that.
Motion
Second.
made, seconded, discussion, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. The next is an update from Councilor Mchugh, Liaison to the Agricultural Conservancy Trust concerning its strategic committee report and farmer recruiting report. Sir.
Thank you. Really not an update for me, but it's going to be an update from two gentlemen sitting over there. I am the liaison for the Ag Trust since July, and I've been attending their meetings, and there's a lot of things going on there. And I thought it came to a point where they could update the council and see if we had any questions for them, and obviously the public. So they have two documents here. So I don't know which one you want to start with, but we're ready to hear from you.
Brought his organizational skills to the trust and organized and really driven two processes that we're going through. We've done some strategic planning, and then within that process, identify opportunities to improve our processes and how we distribute the work without accomplishing those processes, setting goals, and assigning tasks. So it's exciting, it's giving new direction, I think, and more detail and drive to our work. And so with that, I will let Rusty present what he's created.
I must say, this is a collaborative effort, unless you hate it, and then it's all mine. But there's been a lot of input, and particularly in the strategic thought, Mike Steers and Ned Levine have done a lot of work to help, but everybody on the trust has been involved. And this is two presentations, one given in November of last year, one in April of this year, that are part of an ongoing discussion about what is going to be the future of the trust, what are we going to look like, how do we in particular move forward, and in general, how does agriculture in Little Compton move forward? And as part of that, the one that we presented in November was talking about farmer recruiting. In that presentation, we're trying to outline a way to look at how we can get the next generation of people interested in agriculture in Little Compton, as well as better utilize some of our land that we already own. And that part of that land ownership is where we started with that farmer recruiting. Where's the next generation come from? And we looked at basically some procedures, processes that we could potentially establish to offer land that we own that should be or could be back in production, as well as evaluating people who may want to participate in that endeavor. And as you could see from the slides, we talked about perhaps having some ad hoc committees looking at the property, evaluating the people who came to try to use the property, how we're going to advertise for it, you know, spreading a wide net, not just in Little Compton, but out in southern New England to try to look for people who would be interested in being the next generation of agriculture in Little Compton. The whole outline was sort of a think piece at that point in time, and it was left unfinished because of the other considerations that were brought up, specifically having an overall strategic outlook for the trust and then marching to that strategic outlook and how this would fit into that. So this was kind of set aside for a little while because the recommendation at the end of this was that we do that strategic thought and codify it, and the board accepted that. And we in fact did that over the course of the months leading up to the next presentation, which was given in April. And in fact, in March, we laid out our strategic interests, prioritized, and that was accepted by the board. And then the April presentation that you have in front of you is how do we subsequently implement that? How do we divvy up our tasks? How do we streamline what we do, assign particular board members to be responsible for particular areas? And what we looked at was our existing committee structure, and then we had a proposal for how we would amend that. And we ended up with 8 different committees, starting with the executive that you see in that presentation, and going through basically what we do as on a normal basis, on a monthly basis, and parsing those out into buckets that more or less look like they would stand together. And it goes through the executive, the stewardship committee, a property maintenance, because we have plenty of property that we need to maintain, some public outreach. We'd already been doing some of this, but it codified some of these efforts under a particular committee and a certain trustee that is yet to be named, and all the way through down land protection and eventually to recreation. And the board accepted this basic structure. In our next meeting in May, we'll really get to where the rubber meets the road by assigning people some of these tasks. We have. Yes. Mike Steers happened to miss the last meeting, and he absorbed 7 of those, yes. But he appealed that, and I think that we'll probably have everyone at the next meeting to make sure that they don't get extra work. But this is certainly going to change how we do our business to some extent, especially as we sort of get up on the step of the new outline and being a little bit more forward in the way we present ourselves to the community and how we're approaching the responsibility that we have as the Ag Trust.
Yeah, so Rusty, obviously I think it's pretty exciting, you know, the words you're using in next generation of farmer, you know, a strategic outlook that you guys are gonna follow. You know, it also says in 30 years, we may find that the course of action left us with a lot of land but few farmers. So you guys recognize that, you know, you're here to help farmers. And, you know, and you also have in here, consider buying and selling select future properties, purchase land with existing buildings and infrastructure, sell the underlying fee to a younger farmer, reserve an easement for development rights to ensure preservation of the property in perpetuity. You know, so I think it all comes together, you know, obviously without getting into what's going on in town and the school population and people moving in from other states. I think it's exciting to me to see that the LCAT is trying to get people in houses with kids so we can make our town try to sustain what we have left of it. So that's what I see you guys doing, and it's exciting.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. You know, we're trying to look at the town, and, you know, there's been a lot of input from people, including Larry Anderson, Carter Wilkie. There's a lot of concern about how the town's gonna look in 50 years, and I'm in that camp. You know, what's it gonna look like in 50 years? Some of those things that were in that presentation were purely think piece. And, you know, there's some tension amongst the board about what are we going to do and how much of this can we do and where are we going to go with it. But clearly, this is, you know, part of what we're doing now and why we've sort of organized the way we are and gone through the process of laying out our strategic values, you know, core interests, prioritizing them. And now, you know, we can sort of think about things in a little bit different, with a little bit different perspective maybe, and go about it a little bit differently other than just going out and buying land.
Where there is unanimity in the board, and I think due to us bringing this up, is pointing out that we do have a role in that long-term vision of what the town might be. And the fact that we tools and really the obligation to affect that. So we have to think about how we do that. So that's been very valuable.
That's obvious coming through this, is the fact that it, sorry, heads us in a more comprehensive direction, I guess I'd say, to be able to say, this is what matters and here's how we're gonna get there, as opposed to, I don't think we can find a way to get there. Yeah.
I think that I admire, you know, what you come up with, especially regarding the farmer recruiting plan and ideas regarding that. I'm so happy that you guys recognize that, you know, if we want to maintain the agricultural way of life here, we need people to do it. You know, a big part of it is going to be the affordability of town too. So I think you'd find that the housing trust would be a good partner if you guys went down this road and needed some help.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. We have reached out to the Housing Trust on different occasions. I haven't necessarily done it personally, but I know the trust has talked to them. There are some procedural issues there that we have to work through, but I think there is an increasing dedication to try to figure out something, some way to do some of these things in order to bring new people, whether they already live in town, just to keep them in town, or bring in somebody from outside of town in order to, you know, keep the process going over the next generation or two or three, or, you know, however long, so that agriculture just doesn't die out in town.
There has been some young farmers coming into town, that's sweet and salty down there, came into town, so I think if you could give some new farmers, some young blood to come into town and give them whatever you need to do for that land, instead of them coming in and trying to spend $1 million to buy farmland, let them farm the land that's in their
Exactly,
possession.
yeah. And that's a great example, because they were able to use the Wilds, who had preserved some of their land through the Ag Trust, and that's one of the reasons they can afford to be there and doing what they can. But one of the big sticking points, and I think you've heard this before from other sources, is, you know, where do you live in Little Compton and how do you afford it? If you're somebody who is trying to start a farm or, you know, take over a farm as a young family, how do you afford to live here? And that's one of the things that came up, you know, in the think piece portion of the farmer recruiting. Here's something that other entities have done. Could we possibly do this in Little Compton? That's still TBD. In my opinion, you know, the board hasn't said, no, we're not going to do it, but it hasn't jumped on board either. So, you know, we're going to work through all this. Like I said, it kind of got put on the shelf a little bit as we went through the strategic planning process, and then, the reorganization of committee structure so that we could understand where all these tasks were going to reside and give people a specific responsibility. But we'll readdress this.
Thanks. Thank you for bringing this. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rusty.
Thank you both.
Our next item of business is a resolution supporting passage of this.
No, Board of License Commission.
Not so fast. Thank you very much, gatekeepers. Next item is sitting as the Board of License Commissioners, a request from the Little Compton Game Club for a Class F1 one-day retail beverage license.
Motion to approve with all state and local ordinances adhered to.
Second.
Discussion on that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Next then is a resolution by Coventry Town Council supporting passage of a bill in the Senate relating to waters and navigation inspection of dams and reservoirs.
I don't think we have a dog in this fight. I'm gonna move that we place it on file.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Next is a resolution adopted by the Coventry Town Council, Breville Town Council, condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Bob, would you, be kind enough to make a resolution from the town of Little Compton, condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine? I think that's just a very terrible situation going on over there. It's, those people are getting slaughtered over there for, as far as I'm concerned, no good reason.
Is that your motion?
To bring
Yeah, that's
back
my
to the-
motion.
To the council.
Yeah.
The motion then is made and seconded for the council president to prepare and deliver to the council's next meeting such a motion. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you. Next item is a resolution adopted by Coventry supporting a Senate bill and House bill which require maintenance of sidewalks along state highways to be the responsibility of the state. This is common in places like Bristol, Middletown, Portsmouth. We have very few state roads in which there are sidewalks, with the exception of perhaps this area where we'd like to have sidewalks. But it seems to me this is not a thing.
Motion to place on file.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Next item is a letter from Interior Fish and Wildlife Service announcing the report to Congress entitled the John H. Chafee Coastal Barrier Resources System Hurricane Sandy Remapping Project. I acknowledge that this is a resource. I don't believe it has any action for us, but we'll be reviewing it. The
Does this have
administrator.
any coincide with the, was it Gooseberry Island study that's going on at the same time?
I'm not,
The Army Corps of Engineers built a land bridge at Horse Neck Beach from the land to the island to put that
Right.
tower up. And there's a study out now. I just don't know if these two talk to each other or not.
I don't know.
They basically took a barrier island and made it into a barrier peninsula.
Right, understood. I honestly don't know the focus of this Hurricane Sandy remapping project, so I
Motion to
can't
place
answer
on
your
file.
question.
I'll second.
Discussion on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next is an email received from Richard Kalinowski addressed to the council, the Beach Commission, and the Ag Trust. The email spoke of beach closing policies as well as the recent purchase of Almy Creek and access over Oliver Lane. Is Mr. Kalinowski here? He's not. This is a comprehensive email involving all the bodies. Perhaps I could say on behalf of the Beach Commission and the Ag Trust that the three bodies, Council, Beach, and Ag Trust, are certainly working together on the issue of Almy Creek and its access and its development or its non-development and who will have purview. And we can direct this correspondence to those three bodies for their consideration as part of the development of the plan.
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
Yeah, the only discussion I see for reading this is I would just weigh in, and again, I don't know what the council and the beach commission and everything else works, but I would be in favor of taking out that gate, eradicating it at South Shore. My opinion, I think if Chief Petrin or Chief Raines, who I respect immensely, want to close the beach, then they should close the beach for whatever time they need for the public safety. Other than that, I would eradicate that barrier.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on that motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. A resolution adopted by the Charlestown Town Council supporting a House bill that provides in part a definition of the high tide line.
I'm not sure how I feel on this.
Well, it's definitely gonna end up in court.
So,
It just got delayed, didn't it?
I believe so. So I'll make a motion to place it on file, whether you people want to agree or not, that's fine, unless the solicitor wants
I'll
to make a
second that.
comment.
The motion's made and seconded. What other discussion do we have on this matter? This certainly, the definition of high tide line is a fascinating drill. In my experience, one wants to avoid the high tide line, but there are lots of people who don't want to avoid the high tide line, so I understand the differences, but suffice it to say that this, it's something that certainly begs for clarification. I've looked at the bill, I'm not sure that it makes a step in that direction. It's, yeah. But I don't know that I would propose a better idea, so I would intend to vote in favor of the motion to place on file. Any other comments? How do you vote? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. A resolution by Burrillville Town Council opposing a host of gun control legislation bills.
Motion to place on file.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second your motion.
Motion is made and seconded. Is there further discussion?
I had a comment on this, and I just can't remember what it was. So I guess I guess if Paul's on board with it, I don't want, you know, I think everybody has the right to bear arms, except for, you know, machine guns and whatever the kids are using these days. So I just want to make sure yeah, so they're opposing any gun control legislation, so I'd be in favor of it.
Of opposing it?
Yeah.
Okay, then I will state that when one opposes 12 bills, I don't know how you comprehensively do that, so I've got it. For the moment, I would vote to place this on file because of that gathering of a whole group of things together and saying these all reference gun control in some fashion or another. So,
Second.
no, the motion's on the table and it's been seconded.
Okay. Your discussion, okay, Bob.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm ready for a motion if you are. I'm ready for a vote if you are. All in favor of the motion to place this on file, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you.
Motion to place the consent calendar on file unless anybody wants to pull one for discussion.
I'll second.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And the payment of bills.
Motion to pay the bills unless anybody has any questions or comments on the bills as proposed.
I'll second.
Discussion on that. All in favor? Aye. Having no further matters before us, just before I declare the meeting adjourned, I'd like to recognize the reporter from the Secana Times, Ruth Rasmussen. Thank you for being here.
Stand up and take a bow.
We haven't had anyone here for a good while, and we're grateful to be here.
We'll have to create some controversy for the paper, I guess.
I declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you.